In the 12 months before Enron filed for bankruptcy in December 2001, 16 of the 17 Wall Street analysts covering the company had a buy recommendation on the stock. Not a hold, a buy. During the same 12 months, the specific evidence that would reveal Enron's financial manipulation was available in the company's publicly filed financial statements to anyone willing to read them carefully and without a predetermined conclusion. Jim Chanos, a short seller who had been analyzing Enron since mid-2000, described his process in interviews afterward as straightforward. He read the financial statements, found things that didn't add up, asked questions the company wouldn't answer directly, and concluded that the stock was overvalued. The process required no special information. It required starting from a position of genuine uncertainty about the conclusion, approaching the evidence to find out what it said, rather than to confirm what he already believed. The 16 analysts who maintained buy recommendations were not, for the most part, incompetent. They were not poorly trained. Many of them were covering Enron through the investment banking relationships their firms had with the company, relationships that created a specific financial incentive to maintain positive coverage. But the mechanism that prevented the evidence from changing their conclusion was not primarily financial. It was cognitive. They had already concluded that Enron was a well-run, innovative company, and the evidence they encountered was processed through that conclusion rather than used to test it. This is confirmation bias functioning as due diligence, the process of reviewing evidence conducted in a way that systematically returns the conclusion that was present before the review began. The psychological research on confirmation bias is extensive, and its findings are consistent. Humans actively seek information that supports existing beliefs, interpret ambiguous information as supporting existing beliefs, and weight disconfirming information as less credible or less relevant than confirming information, all without experiencing themselves as doing any of these things. The bias operates below the level of conscious awareness. The person experiencing it feels as though they are being objective. This is the specific feature that makes confirmation bias so dangerous in professional settings. It is entirely compatible with genuine effort, genuine intelligence, and genuine commitment to reaching the right conclusion. The analyst who maintains a buy recommendation on Enron in 2001 is not consciously ignoring evidence. They are processing evidence through a framework that returns the conclusion the framework was built to return. The framework is, Enron is a well-run company. Evidence consistent with this framework is incorporated. Evidence inconsistent with it is explained away, deprioritized, or attributed to the source's bias rather than to the company's condition. The mechanism operates identically in organizational due diligence processes. A company evaluating an acquisition finds the target company interesting. The strategic rationale is compelling, the leadership team is impressive, the initial conversations have been positive. The due diligence process begins with this evaluation already in place. The team conducting the due diligence has been told what the strategic rationale is. They have a deadline and a mandate to evaluate whether the acquisition should proceed. In this context, the due diligence process does not start from genuine uncertainty. It starts from a conclusion. This acquisition makes strategic sense, and it is structured to verify that conclusion rather than to test it. Evidence that supports the conclusion is incorporated as validation. Evidence that challenges it is reviewed for explanations that preserve the conclusion. The target company's margins are lower than industry average because of a specific near-term investment cycle that will reverse. The customer churn is higher than expected because of a pricing change that has since been corrected. The key personnel retention risk is manageable because of retention packages that have been negotiated. Have you ever participated in or observed a due diligence process where the conclusion was functionally present before the process began, where the process was structured to confirm rather than to test? Leave a comment. WeWork's due diligence process, or more accurately, its absence, is the most documented contemporary example of confirmation bias operating as institutional due diligence. The investors who provided $4 billion to WeWork across multiple rounds between 2014 and 2019, SoftBank among them, but also Benchmark, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, T. Rowe Price, were not naive. They were sophisticated institutional investors with experienced teams and explicit mandates to evaluate risk. The information that would reveal WeWork's actual financial condition, the scale of its losses, the structure of its lease obligations, the governance provisions that gave Adam Neumann extraordinary unaccountable control, was available in the company's financial documents. The S-1 filing in 2019 did not introduce new negative information about WeWork. It introduced existing negative information to an audience, public market investors, that was approaching it without a prior positive conclusion. Public investors read the S-1, applied standard financial analysis, and revised the valuation downward by 75% in weeks. The private investors, who had funded the company through multiple rounds, had access to more detailed information than the S-1 provided. They had been inside the company's financials at each round. The difference between their conclusion and the public market's conclusion was not informational. It was framing. The private investors approached each round of information with the conclusion, WeWork is a high-growth company in an expanding market already in place, and the information was processed through that conclusion. The public investors approached the S-1 as a first read with no prior conclusion, and the same information produced a different result. If the specific mechanism, how the same information produces different conclusions depending on the prior conclusion with which it's approached, is the level of analysis you come here for, the like, is the direct signal. The organizational cost of confirmation bias in due diligence is not confined to investment decisions. It operates in hiring, in product evaluation, in competitive analysis, and in strategy review. Anywhere a formal process of evidence gathering is conducted in conditions where a conclusion has already been formed. The hiring process for a senior executive who has impressed the CEO in an initial meeting is, in most organizations, a process of confirming the CEO's impression rather than testing it. The questions are structured around the candidate's stated qualifications. The references are provided by the candidate and are predictably positive. The concerns raised by interviewers who are less impressed are attributed to their failure to understand what the role requires. The candidate who was interesting to the CEO is hired, and the due diligence process produces the documentation that supports the hire. The product evaluation process for a product that the team has been developing for 18 months is a process in which the team's 18 months of investment creates a prior conclusion. This product works. That shapes how the evaluation evidence is processed. The user testing result that suggests the core feature doesn't land clearly enough is explained as a poorly selected test group. The competitive analysis that shows a better resourced competitor is working on a similar product is incorporated as validation that the market is real. The cost analysis that shows the unit economics are below threshold is remodeled with a growth assumption that brings them above threshold. Each of these explanations may be correct. The specific feature that makes them confirmation bias rather than honest analysis is that they were generated in response to disconfirming evidence by people who were looking for a reason to maintain the prior conclusion rather than looking for an accurate assessment of whether the evidence warranted revision. The structural intervention that addresses confirmation bias in due diligence has a name from the intelligence community: red teaming. The formal assignment of a person or group to find the strongest possible case against a conclusion, independent of whether they believe that case. The pre-mortem, referenced in earlier episodes, is a related technique, assuming the failure has occurred and working backward to explain it, which bypasses the social and psychological dynamics that make disconfirming evidence feel threatening when the conclusion is still live. What makes these interventions effective is not that they produce better information. The information is usually already available. What makes them effective is that they change the framing of the person processing the information. The red teamer, who is explicitly assigned to find the case against the acquisition, is not subject to the confirmation bias of the team that has already concluded the acquisition is strategically sound, because their assignment explicitly requires them to start from the opposite conclusion. The practical thing: in any evaluation where a conclusion is already present, any due diligence that follows a compelling initial pitch, any product review that follows an enthusiastic team presentation, any acquisition that follows a positive CEO meeting, require explicitly that someone in the process be assigned the specific task of finding the strongest case against the conclusion, not to balance the analysis, not to be fair, but to find the thing that the confirmation bias of the team that formed the prior conclusion will systematically miss. That assignment, given to the right person with the right mandate, is the only structural mechanism that reliably produces information that confirmation bias would otherwise prevent the team from seeing. The next episode looks at a failure that combines the confirmation bias examined here with the overconfidence trap examined earlier, the specific compound error that makes success the most dangerous condition for an organization's analytical accuracy. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.